Part 1: The Unexpected Hatching. Alara Voss had always found solace in the whispering silence of the Whispering Peaks. Her modest cabin, nestled against the craggy shoulder of Mount Ethera, was a sanctuary of weathered timber and moss-covered stone, where the only companions were the wind sighing through the ancient pines and the occasional flutter of mountain sparrows. At 32, she had grown accustomed to solitude. The villagers down in Eldridge Hollow called her the Hermit Herbalist, a title she wore with quiet pride rather than resentment. Her days unfolded in gentle rhythm, gathering rare herbs along mist-shrouded trails, distilling fragrant oils by the light of her hearth, and losing herself in leather-bound tomes filled with forgotten lore of the natural world. She was not unhappy. Loneliness, she told herself, was simply the price of peace. Yet on crisp autumn mornings when golden sunlight filtered through the canopy like liquid amber, a subtle ache would stir in her chest, an unspoken longing for something warm and alive to share her space with. She had no family left, no lover waiting in the valleys below, only her hands calloused from grinding roots and tying bundles of lavender, and her heart steady but quietly yearning. It was on one such ordinary afternoon, with the air tasting of pine resin and distant rain, that Alara's life veered into the realm of wonder. She had ventured farther than usual that day, her woven basket slung over one shoulder, seeking the elusive Moonville fern said to bloom only beneath the oldest oaks. The forest floor was a tapestry of fallen leaves in shades of crimson, ochre, and burnt sienna, crunching softly beneath her boots. Sunbeams pierced the branches in slanted shafts, illuminating motes of dust that danced like tiny fairies. As she knelt beside a gnarled oak whose roots twisted like sleeping serpents, something unusual caught her eye. Half buried beneath a tangle of thick moss-draped roots was a cluster of 5 eggs. They were smaller than she expected for anything wild, each roughly the size of a large apple yet far more exquisite. Their shells shimmered with an iridescent sheen that shifted colors as the light touched them, deep emerald bleeding into sapphire, then flickering with veins of molten gold and amethyst. Tiny cracks like delicate frost patterns laced their surfaces, and when Alara brushed away the damp soil with trembling fingers, a faint warmth radiated from within, pulsing gently like a living heartbeat. Her breath caught in her throat. These were no ordinary bird eggs, nor the leathery orbs of mountain lizards. Legends spoke of mountain dragons, reclusive, majestic beings whose nests were hidden from mortal eyes. Most tales painted them as fearsome guardians of hordes and skis, but here, abandoned or perhaps lost to some unseen tragedy, lay their vulnerable young. Alara's heart swelled with a fierce, protective tenderness. She could not leave them to the mercy of the encroaching frost or prowling foxes. With infinite care, she lifted each egg, cradling them like fragile glass ornaments. Their surfaces were smooth yet subtly textured, warm as sun-baked stones. She wrapped them gently in her woolen scarf, tucking the bundles securely into her basket atop a bed of soft ferns. The walk home felt lighter, as if the forest itself hummed with secret approval. Birds seemed to sing brighter, and the wind carried a playful note that tousled her auburn hair. Back in the cabin, Alara cleared a space near the stone hearth where the fire crackled with comforting orange glow. She fashioned a nest from folded quilts, soft sheep's wool, and handfuls of dried lavender to mask any wild scent. The eggs nestled perfectly there, their iridescent shells catching the firelight and throwing dancing rainbows across the wooden walls. She misted them lightly with water from her purest spring, whispering soft words as she worked. "You're safe now, little ones," she murmured, her voice a soothing melody. "Whatever you are, I'll keep you warm." That first night she sat vigil by the hearth, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands. The cabin smelled of herbs and wood smoke, a familiar comfort now laced with anticipation. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly and rain pattered against the thatched roof like impatient fingers. Alara read aloud from an old book of children's fables, her tone gentle and rhythmic, as though the unborn creatures inside the eggs could absorb the stories through their shells. Tales of brave knights and clever foxes, of hidden magic and found families. Days blurred into a quiet routine of devotion. Each morning, Alara checked the eggs, noting how the warmth increased and the delicate cracks deepened ever so slightly. She spoke to them constantly, sharing snippets of her day, describing the way sunlight painted the peaks in hues of rose and gold, or how the river sang over smooth stones. "Today I found wild ginger," she would say, her green eyes sparkling. "Its scent reminds me of summer storms. When you hatch, perhaps we'll explore together." She fed them nothing yet, of course, but prepared small offerings nearby. Diced dried fruits soaked in honey, tiny bowls of fresh cream, and crushed nuts. The air in the cabin grew thick with expectancy, a palpable energy that made the flames in the hearth dance higher. Then came the stormy night that changed everything. The wind howled like a wounded beast, rattling the shutters and sending gusts down the chimney that made the fire roar. Rain lashed the windows in silver sheets, and lightning split the sky with brilliant, jagged veins of white. Alara had lit every lantern, bathing the cabin in a golden, flickering glow. She sat cross-legged before the nest, her heart pounding in time with the thunder. The first crack sounded like the snap of a dry twig, sharp, decisive. One of the eggs trembled, its shell fracturing along a glowing seam. A tiny claw, no larger than a thorn, pierced through, flexing experimentally. Alara leaned closer, her breath shallow with awe. "Come on, little one," she whispered encouragingly. "You're almost here." More cracks followed in rapid succession. The eggs rocked and shivered as if alive with inner lightning. Shell fragments fell away like discarded jewels, revealing glistening, wet forms beneath. One by one, 5 minuscule dragons emerged into the world. The first was a vibrant emerald green, its scales shimmering like polished leaves after rain. It shook itself vigorously, sending droplets flying and unfurled translucent wings no bigger than butterfly wings. Its eyes, large, luminous orbs of molten gold, blinked up at Alara with innocent curiosity. A second followed, sapphire blue with silver flecks that caught the firelight like stars. Then came a fiery orange one, a deep ruby red, and finally a soft charcoal gray that seemed to absorb the shadows yet glowed with inner warmth. They were impossibly tiny, each no larger than Alara's palm. Their bodies were plump and rounded, with stubby legs ending in delicate claws and tails that curled like question marks. Soft chirps and squeaks filled the air, high-pitched melodic sounds that tugged at something deep within her soul. They tumbled over one another in a wriggling pile, slick with egg fluid, their tiny chests heaving with their first full breaths. Alara's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. "Oh, my darlings," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "Look at you, so perfect." She reached out slowly, afraid her touch might startle them. The emerald one, whom she instinctively named Ember, nuzzled against her fingertip, its scales warm and velvety. A tiny puff of smoke escaped its nostrils, harmless and sweet-smelling like incense. The others followed suit, drawn to her warmth. Spark, the sapphire, climbed clumsily onto her hand, its wings fluttering weakly. Flicker, the orange, let out a delighted squeak and batted at a stray lock of her hair. Blaze and Cinder soon joined, their combined weight barely more than a handful of feathers. She gathered them all gently into the cradle of her arms, feeling their rapid heartbeats against her chest like the patter of raindrops. Their bodies radiated a gentle heat, soothing and alive. The scent of them was clean and wild, ozone after a storm mixed with something floral and ancient. Alara rocked them softly, humming an old lullaby her mother once sang, her heart overflowing with a love she hadn't known she was capable of. For the first few days, the tiny dragon bobbies were a vision of pure innocence. They slept in a contented heap on her pillow, their bodies intertwined, tiny snores and occasional sleepy chirps punctuating the night. During the day, they perched on her shoulders as she moved about the cabin, their claws gripping her tunic with surprising gentleness. Ember loved to watch her grind herbs, tilting his head at the rhythmic motion of the pestle. Spark would chase sunbeams across the floor, pouncing with clumsy enthusiasm. Flicker discovered the joy of batting at dangling strings of dried flowers, while Blaze and Cinder preferred curling up in the crook of her elbow, basking in her body heat. Alara fed them with painstaking care. She mashed soft fruits, berries, apples, and pears into a sweet pulp, mixing in honey and a touch of cream. The bobbies devoured it eagerly, their small pink tongues lapping with gusto. Between feedings, she spoke to them endlessly, her voice a constant thread of affection. "You're going to be strong and kind," she told them one evening as firelight painted their scales in shifting colors. "The world out there can be harsh, but here you have a home, and I have you." Their eyes, so wide and trusting, seemed to understand. When she laughed, they echoed with chirping sounds that sounded suspiciously like giggles. When she sighed over a stubborn stain on her apron, they nuzzled closer, offering silent comfort. Nights were especially magical. The five would pile onto her lap as she read by candlelight, their warm bodies a living blanket. Ember would occasionally sneeze a harmless spark that made the others scatter in playful alarm before tumbling back together. Their wings, still too weak for true flight, would flutter like leaves in a breeze, brushing against her skin with feather-light touches. Alara felt transformed. The cabin, once echoing with emptiness, now brimmed with life and sound. The ache in her chest had dissolved, replaced by a fierce, protective joy. She no longer walked the trails alone in her mind. She imagined showing these little ones the hidden glades, the crystal pools, the places where wild magic lingered. She named them with care, each name evoking their emerging personalities. Ember, the bold emerald one, always the first to explore. Spark, the sapphire dreamer who stared at flames for hours. Flicker, the orange mischief maker with endless energy. Blaze, the ruby red whose pearl-like rumble vibrated through her palm. Cinder, the charcoal gray observer, quiet yet intensely curious. As the stormy night faded into clear, star-filled skies, Alara lay awake long after the bobbies had drifted off. She traced gentle patterns on their scales, marveling at the intricate beauty of each one. The way light refracted off their bodies like living gems, the soft rise and fall of their breaths, the absolute trust they placed in her. In those quiet hours, she whispered promises into the warm darkness. "I don't know what the future holds, my little dragons, but I know this: you will never be alone again, and neither will I. The tiny dragon bobbies stirred in their sleep, pressing closer as if sealing the vow. Outside, the mountain winds carried the distant call of an adult dragon, low, resonant, and searching. But for now, the cabin remained a cocoon of safety and budding love. Little did Alara know that these perfect, angelic days were merely the calm before the delightful storm of tiny wings, curious claws, and playful puffs of flame. Yet even when the messes came, as they inevitably would, she would look back on this hatching night with nothing but gratitude. For in the unexpected arrival of 5 tiny lives, the lonely herbalist had found her family, and her heart had never felt so full. Part 2: The Grand Chaos. By the end of their first week in the world, the 5 tiny dragon bobbies had transformed Alara's peaceful mountain cabin from a sanctuary of quiet order into a living whirlwind of playful destruction. What began as gentle exploration blossomed into unrestrained, joyous chaos. And somehow, with every overturned jar and singed curtain, Alara's heart only softened further. It started subtly, as most great adventures do. Ember, the bold emerald one, was the first to discover the sheer delight of movement. One golden afternoon, while Alara was bent over her worktable grinding dried valerian root, he launched himself from her shoulder with a determined flap of his translucent wings. The leap was clumsy, more glide than flight, but it carried him across the room in a wobbly arc. He landed squarely in the middle of her favorite patchwork quilt, the one her grandmother had stitched with threads of midnight blue and forest green. His tiny claws caught in the fabric, and with an excited squeak he began to wriggle, pulling threads loose and leaving a trail of tiny puncture marks that looked like constellations. Alara straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and watched with a fond smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, Ember, careful with that, it's older than both of us." But Ember was already rolling, his plump body tumbling across the quilt like a living emerald marble. Spark, never one to be left behind, launched after him. The sapphire dragon's wings caught a draft from the open window, sending him spiraling in an accidental loop before he crash-landed beside his brother. The two of them immediately began a playful wrestling match, their bodies tangling in a blur of green and blue scales. Soft puffs of harmless smoke puffed from their nostrils with each excited chirp, filling the air with the sweet scent of scorched honey and wild herbs. Flicker, the fiery orange troublemaker, chose that moment to investigate the kitchen. He had grown bolder with each passing day, his energy boundless. Alara had left a row of glass jars on the counter, lavender buds, sage leaves, powdered ginger, and precious cinnamon sticks imported from distant southern lands. Flicker's golden eyes widened at the colorful array. With a gleeful squeal, he leaped onto the nearest jar, his small claws scrabbling for purchase. The jar teetered, then toppled with a crystalline crash. Dried lavender exploded into the air like purple snow, coating everything in a fragrant cloud. The scent was intoxicating, sweet, floral, almost dizzying. Flicker sneezed, sending a tiny jet of orange flame that singed the edge of a hanging bunch of rosemary. The flame was no larger than a candle flicker, but it was enough to make the dried herbs crackle and release even more aroma. Blaze and Cinder, drawn by the commotion, fluttered over to join the fun. Blaze, with his deep ruby scales glowing like banked coals, pounced on a rolling cinnamon stick, batting it across the floor with his tail. Cinder, quieter but no less curious, discovered the open flour sack. What followed was a symphony of miniature disaster. Cinder's charcoal-gray body dove headfirst into the sack, emerging dusted head to toe in fine white powder. He shook himself vigorously, sending a blizzard of flour swirling through the sunlit cabin. The white cloud mixed with the lavender and the faint smoke from Flicker's earlier mishap, creating a swirling grayish-purple haze that danced in the shafts of afternoon light. The tiny dragons chased the floating particles as if they were living fireflies, their wings beating frantically, their chirps rising into delighted squeals that echoed off the wooden beams. Alara stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms crossed loosely over her chest, her auburn hair lightly dusted with flour. She should have felt frustration. The quilt was ruined, the herb jars shattered, her carefully organized workspace now a fragrant battlefield. Yet all she could do was laugh, a soft, helpless sound that bubbled up from deep within her chest. "Look at you all," she whispered, her voice thick with affection rather than scolding. "You've turned my home into a snowstorm of lavender and flour." The bobbies froze for the briefest moment, their luminous eyes turning toward her with that perfect blend of innocence and mischief. Ember tilted his head, a single lavender bud stuck comically between his tiny horns. Spark had flour coating one side of his sapphire face like war paint. Flicker's orange scales were streaked with cinnamon dust, making him look like a living spice dragon. Blaze and Cinder simply waddled closer, trailing flowery footprints across the floorboards. They pressed against her legs, warm little bodies vibrating with rapid heartbeats and happy rumbles. Cinder even offered her a slightly damp, flour-covered cinnamon stick as if it were a priceless gift. Alara knelt, gathering all 5 into her arms despite the mess they left on her apron. Their scales felt silky against her skin, still carrying the faint warmth of their inner fire. She could feel each tiny puff of breath, each excited twitch of wing and tail. "How can I be mad at faces like these?" she murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to Ember's flower-dusted head. The emerald dragon chirped softly and nuzzled into her neck, leaving a smudge of white on her collar. But the chaos was only beginning. Later that same evening, as twilight painted the mountain peaks in strokes of rose and violet, the tiny dragons discovered the bookshelf. Alara had spent years collecting leather-bound volumes, herbals, bestiaries, old fairy tales, and maps of forgotten realms. The shelves reached nearly to the ceiling, sturdy oak reinforced with iron brackets. To 5 curious dragon bobbies with newly strengthening wings, it looked like the most magnificent playground ever created. Flicker was the first to attempt the ascent. He launched from the back of a chair, wings flapping with determined fury, and managed to catch the edge of the second shelf. His claws dug into the wood, leaving tiny crescent scratches. Blaze followed, using Flicker's tail as a makeshift ladder. Soon all 5 were clambering upward in a chaotic scramble of scales and squeaks. Books began to tumble. A heavy tome on mountain flora crashed to the floor with a thud, pages fluttering open to reveal delicate watercolor illustrations now dusted with flower and lavender. Another volume, Alara's prized collection of dragon legends, slid off the shelf and landed spine first, its pages splaying like broken wings. The bobbies used the fallen books as landing pads, gliding from one to another with increasing confidence. Their wings, still translucent and delicate, caught the firelight and glowed like stained glass. Ember perched triumphantly on the highest shelf he could reach, puffing out his chest and releasing a proud little jet of emerald-tinted smoke. The smoke curled upward, brushing against the ceiling beams and leaving faint scorch marks that looked like abstract paintings. Spark, ever the dreamer, became fascinated by the way the firelight reflected off the gilded lettering on the book spines. He batted at the shiny letters, sending more volumes cascading down in a waterfall of paper and leather. The noise was incredible, a cacophony of thuds, flutters, chirps, and the occasional high-pitched squeal of triumph or surprise. Flower and lavender still hung in the air, now mixed with the earthy scent of old paper and the sweet smoke of dragon breath. Alara watched from her rocking chair, a half-mended quilt forgotten in her lap. Her heart swelled with a strange mixture of exasperation and overwhelming love. Every crash made her wince, yet every delighted chirp made her smile wider. She saw not destruction but pure unfiltered joy. These tiny beings were experiencing the world for the first time, its textures, its smells, its possibilities, and they were doing so with every fiber of their small, vibrant bodies. "Come down before you hurt yourselves," she called gently, though there was no real command in her voice. Instead, she rose and held out her arms like a landing platform. One by one, they glided or tumbled into her embrace. Flicker misjudged his landing and bounced off her shoulder, leaving a fresh claw mark on her sleeve. Blaze curled immediately into the crook of her elbow, rumbling contentedly. Cinder, still the quietest, simply rested his head against her collarbone, his charcoal scales cool and smooth against her skin. But the grandest chaos of all arrived with the hearth. Night had fully fallen, and the fire crackled merrily in the stone fireplace, casting long dancing shadows across the walls. The bobbies, exhausted from their bookshelf adventures yet still buzzing with energy, gathered near the warmth. Cinder, usually the most observant, stared into the flames with intense fascination. His gray eyes reflected the orange glow, growing brighter and brighter. Without warning, he took a deep breath, his tiny chest expanding like a bellows, and released a puff of flame toward the kindling pile Alara had set aside for morning. The spark was small, barely more than a candle's flicker, but it landed perfectly on the dry tinder. Flames leaped up with sudden enthusiasm. The other 4 dragons reacted with pure delight. Ember and Spark dashed forward, chasing the rising sparks as if they were living toys. Flicker and Blaze joined in, their wings beating furiously as they darted through the swirling embers. Tiny jets of colored flame, emerald, sapphire, orange, ruby, and gray shot from their mouths in playful bursts, turning the hearth into a miniature fireworks display. Soot and ash rose in dark clouds, mixing with the lingering flower to create a chaotic blizzard of black and white. Alara's prized teacup collection, displayed on a shelf above the mantel, did not survive the excitement. A particularly enthusiastic flap from Flicker sent a spark sailing upward. It landed on the delicate porcelain, and one by one the cups began to shatter with musical tinkling sounds, shards of painted china raining down like glittering hail. The window box herb garden, lovingly tended on the sill, became a trampled playground as the dragons chased sparks across the soil, crushing petals and leaving muddy claw prints in their wake. The cabin was now a complete disaster. Flour coated every surface like fresh snow. Lavender and sage perfumed the air so thickly it was almost dizzying. Soot streaked the walls and ceiling in abstract patterns. Books lay scattered across the floor, some with singed edges, others with pages forever marked by tiny claw prints. The quilt was a battlefield of pulls and burns. The teacups were glittering ruins. Even the air felt alive, warm, smoky, fragrant, and electric with the energy of 5 tiny, exuberant lives. Alara stood motionless in the center of it all, her arms hanging loosely at her sides. Her apron was ruined, her hair a wild tangle dusted with flour and ash, a single lavender bud caught behind her ear. She surveyed the wreckage slowly, taking in every detail. The singed curtains fluttering in the night breeze, the muddy paw prints across her handwritten recipe book, the way the fire now roared higher than it ever had thanks to the dragon's enthusiastic help. Any other person might have shouted, might have scolded, might have felt anger rise hot and sharp in their chest. But Alara felt only a profound, aching tenderness. She sank to her knees amid the flour and shards, opening her arms wide. The tiny dragon bobbies, sensing the shift, froze in their playful frenzy. One by one they waddled, fluttered, and tumbled toward her, Ember leading with his head held high yet eyes wide with sudden uncertainty, Spark trailing flowery footprints, Flicker still carrying a cinnamon stick in his mouth like a trophy, Blaze rumbling softly, and Cinder bringing up the rear with a smudge of soot across his snout. They climbed into her lap, pressing their warm, messy bodies against her. Their chirps softened into apologetic little coos, their luminous eyes gazing up at her with pure, trusting innocence. Tiny tails wrapped around her fingers, small wings brushed her cheeks, warm puffs of breath tickled her skin. Alara gathered them close, tears, happy, overwhelmed tears, sliding down her cheeks and cutting clean trails through the flour on her face. "How could I ever be mad at you?" she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. She stroked their scales, feeling the rapid flutter of their hearts, the silky texture of their wings, the gentle heat that radiated from within each small body. "You're not making a mess, you're making memories, you're making life." The fire crackled softly behind them, the only sound now besides their contented rumbles and her quiet sniffles. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the distant, lonely call of an adult dragon searching for its young. But inside the cabin, amid the glorious wreckage of flour, herbs, books, and broken china, a different kind of magic had taken root. A bond forged not in perfection, but in beautiful, unrestrained chaos. Alara held her tiny dragons through the night, rocking them gently as they drifted into exhausted sleep. Their bodies were still dusted with flour and soot, their wings smudged, their claws carrying traces of cinnamon and lavender. She did not clean, not yet. She simply held them, breathing in the sweet, smoky, floral mess of their first great adventure, and felt her lonely heart expand until it filled every corner of the ruined cabin. The grand chaos had only just begun, but already she knew she would never trade a single singed thread or shattered cup for the joy these 5 tiny lives had brought into her world. Part 3: The Unbreakable Bond. The morning after the grand chaos dawned soft and golden over the whispering peaks, painting the cabin's single window in hues of honey and rose. Sunlight slanted through the glass, illuminating the magnificent wreckage that still blanketed every surface. Flour lay in gentle drifts across the floorboards like fresh mountain snow. Lavender buds and sage leaves clung to the walls in fragrant constellations. Shards of Alara's cherished teacups glittered among the debris like scattered stars, and the air carried a complex perfume, sweet smoke, crushed herbs, cinnamon warmth, and the faint, clean scent of dragon scales. Alara Voss stood in the center of it all, 5 tiny dragons curled asleep in the crook of her arms. Their bodies rose and fell in perfect synchrony, small chests puffing with soft, rhythmic breaths. Ember's emerald head rested against her collarbone, Spark's sapphire wing draped across her wrist, Flicker's orange tail curled loosely around her thumb. Blaze and Cinder nestled deeper into the warmth of her embrace, their charcoal and ruby scales still dusted with flour and soot from the night's adventures. Tiny smudges of lavender dotted their snouts, and faint singe marks decorated their translucent wings like badges of honor. She should have felt exhausted. Instead, a profound, quiet joy bloomed in her chest, warm and steady as the hearth fire that had somehow survived the previous evening's excitement. Alara lowered herself carefully into her old rocking chair, the wood creaking softly beneath her weight. She did not reach for the broom, not yet. For now, she simply held them, letting the morning light wash over their small forms and trace the delicate patterns of their scales. "How did 5 such tiny creatures manage to turn my entire world upside down?" she whispered, her voice a tender caress. A single tear born not of sorrow but of overwhelming love slid down her cheek and landed on Ember's head. The emerald dragon stirred, blinking open his luminous golden eyes. He gazed up at her with such pure, unfiltered trust that Alara's heart clenched. Ember let out a soft, questioning chirp, tilting his head. The sound was melodic, like wind chimes made of crystal. One by one the others woke, stretching their stubby limbs and unfurling their wings with sleepy flutters. Spark yawned widely, revealing a tiny pink tongue and rows of needle-sharp baby teeth. Flicker immediately began batting at a stray lock of Alara's auburn hair, his orange scales catching the sunlight and glowing like living flame. Blaze rumbled a deep, contented purr that vibrated through her palm, while Cinder simply pressed his charcoal-gray forehead against her chin, seeking closeness. Alara laughed, a gentle, watery sound that filled the sunlit cabin. Yes, yes, I know you're sorry, or at least you look sorry. She stroked each of them in turn, her calloused herbalist's fingers tracing the silky texture of their scales, feeling the faint warmth that radiated from within each small body. But how could I scold you when you've brought more life into this house than it has seen in years? With infinite patience, she began the long task of restoration, not with frustration, but with the same loving care she had shown when first tending their eggs. She set the bobbies down on a clean corner of the quilt, now permanently decorated with claw marks and scorch patterns, and handed each a small rag. "Help me, little ones," she said softly. "Show me you can be gentle too." What followed was the most endearing form of assistance imaginable. Ember helped by chasing the broom across the floor, pouncing on it with delighted squeaks every time it moved. Spark perched on the edge of the dustpan, flapping his wings to create helpful breezes that only succeeded in scattering the flour further. Flicker discovered the joy of polishing the remaining unbroken jars with his tail, leaving shiny streaks and new smudges in equal measure. Blaze and Cinder took turns carrying tiny shards of teacup to Alara in their mouths, presenting each fragment like precious gems. The cabin slowly transformed once more. Alara swept and wiped and sorted, humming old lullabies under her breath. The bobbies' chirps and rumbles wove through her song, creating a living harmony. Every few minutes one of them would tire of helping and climb back into her lap or onto her shoulder, nuzzling against her neck with warm, affectionate puffs of breath. The scent of lavender and smoke clung to everything, but now it felt comforting rather than chaotic, a reminder of their shared adventure. As the sun climbed higher, Alara opened the cabin door wide, letting fresh mountain air flood inside. The breeze carried the crisp scent of pine and distant snow, mingling with the herbal chaos within. She carried the 5 dragons outside to the small clearing behind the cabin, where soft grass met wildflower meadows and the towering peaks stood sentinel against the sky. Here she had built them a makeshift play area using overturned baskets, soft moss cushions, and a shallow basin of spring water for drinking and splashing. The tiny dragons exploded into the open space with unrestrained glee. Ember took to the air first, his wings beating with newfound strength. He managed short, wobbly flights from one basket to another, landing with triumphant puffs of emerald smoke. Spark discovered the joy of chasing butterflies, darting after their colorful wings with sapphire brilliance flashing in the sunlight. Flicker rolled through the grass like a living flame, crushing petals and leaving trails of crushed wildflowers in his wake. Blaze found a sun-warmed rock and sprawled across it, rumbling with pleasure as he absorbed the heat. Cinder, ever the observer, sat at the edge of the water basin, dipping one claw in and watching the ripples spread with quiet fascination. Alara sat on a weathered stump, watching them with her chin resting in her hands. Her green eyes shone with unshed tears of happiness. The mountain wind played with her hair, carrying away the last traces of flour. She felt lighter than she had in years, unburdened by the weight of solitude that had once pressed so heavily upon her shoulders. These 5 tiny lives had cracked open her heart the same way they had cracked their eggshells, with persistent, beautiful force. "You're teaching me how to live again," she murmured, her voice barely louder than the breeze. "I thought I was content alone, but I was only waiting for you." The days that followed unfolded in a gentle rhythm of mess and mending, chaos and care. The tiny dragons continued their playful destruction, but now Alara met each incident with laughter and lessons rather than silent endurance. One afternoon, Flicker decided the herb garden window box needed aeration. He dug enthusiastically with his claws, sending soil flying in dark arcs and uprooting delicate seedlings. Instead of scolding, Alara knelt beside him, showing him how to pat the soil gently back into place. "Softly, my fiery one," she whispered, guiding his small paw with her finger. "Plants need kindness too." Flicker watched her with wide eyes, then mimicked the motion with surprising delicacy, his orange tail swishing happily. Another evening, Blaze became fascinated by the flickering candles on the table. He puffed experimentally, sending a jet of ruby flame that melted 3 candles into colorful puddles of wax. The wax dripped onto Alara's handwritten recipe book, sealing several pages together forever. She simply smiled, tracing the new wax patterns with her fingertip. "Now my recipes have dragon blessings," she said, scooping Blaze into her arms and pressing a kiss to his warm snout. The ruby dragon purred so loudly, it vibrated through her entire chest. Cinder, the quiet charcoal one, developed a habit of collecting shiny objects. He gathered every small glittering thing he could find, bits of broken teacup, stray copper coins from Alara's purse, even the tiny silver bells she used to mark herb bundles. He arranged them in intricate patterns on the hearthstones, creating miniature hoards that reflected the firelight in dazzling displays. When Alara discovered one such hoard blocking the fireplace, she did not scold. Instead, she added her own contribution, a polished river stone and a sprig of dried starflower. Cinder's eyes widened with delight, and he immediately began rearranging the entire collection to incorporate her gifts. Ember and Spark formed an inseparable duo of aerial mischief. They practiced gliding from the rafters, using Alara's drying herbs as landing targets. Bunches of thyme and rosemary rained down in fragrant avalanches. The cabin floor became a tapestry of scattered petals and leaves. Alara swept them into colorful piles and let the dragons play in them, watching as they burrowed and emerged covered head to tail in herbal confetti. Their laughter, hers bright and human, theirs high and chirping, filled the space until the walls themselves seemed to smile. Through it all, Alara never raised her voice. Not once. When the messes grew particularly spectacular, a full sack of grain overturned during an indoor storm chase, or the discovery that dragon flame could toast bread into perfect crispness when aimed correctly, she simply knelt among the debris, gathered her tiny charges close, and whispered words of patient guidance. "You are fire and wonder," she told them one twilight as they all lay sprawled across her lap, exhausted from another day of discovery. "Fire is not meant to be contained. It is meant to warm, to illuminate, to transform. I will teach you how to use your gifts gently. And you are teaching me how to love without fear." Their luminous eyes gazed up at her with such devotion that her throat tightened with emotion. Small wings brushed her arms. Tiny claws gripped her fingers with careful tenderness. Warm breaths puffed against her skin, carrying the sweet scent of honey and smoke. Nights became sacred rituals of closeness. After the day's adventures, Alara would light the hearth, now carefully screened to prevent further spark-chasing incidents, and settle into her rocking chair with a book. The 5 dragons would pile onto her lap or drape themselves across her shoulders and arms like living jewelry. Their combined warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the mountain chill. She read aloud old tales of dragons and heroes, of friendship and found families, her voice soft and melodic. Occasionally one of them would sneeze a harmless puff of colored smoke that made the fire dance higher. The others would chirp with laughter, and Alara would join them, her own laughter blending seamlessly with theirs. In these quiet hours she spoke to them of her past, of the loneliness that had once wrapped around her heart like winter frost, of how their arrival had melted it away, leaving only warmth and color in its place. "I didn't know how empty my days were until you filled them," she confessed one night, stroking Cinder's smooth gray head. "Now every sunrise feels like a promise." The mountain itself seemed to notice the change. Birds sang brighter near the cabin. Wildflowers bloomed more vibrantly in the clearing. Even the wind carried a gentler note, as if the peaks themselves approved of the tiny lives now thriving under Alara's care. Weeks turned into months. The tiny dragons grew slowly but noticeably. Their wings strengthened, allowing longer glides and brief hovering flights. Their flames grew hotter but remained carefully controlled under Alara's patient teaching. She constructed a safe outdoor play yard with fireproof stones and soft moss barriers. There they practiced puffing flames at targets she set up, old logs and dried pine cones, learning precision and restraint. Ember became the strongest flyer, soaring in short loops around the clearing. Spark developed a talent for creating beautiful smoke rings that shimmered in rainbow hues. Flicker's energy found outlet in elaborate obstacle courses Alara built from branches and stones. Blaze learned to warm specific spots of ground for sunbathing, while Cinder's quiet intelligence helped him solve simple puzzles she created from pebbles and twigs. Yet no matter how much they grew, they remained her bobbies. Every evening they returned to her arms, seeking the same closeness they had known since hatching. Every night they slept piled together on her pillow or in the nest she had first prepared, their soft snores a lullaby that soothed her into peaceful dreams. One crisp evening, as autumn painted the peaks in fiery reds and golds, a deep, resonant call echoed across the mountains. It was unlike anything Alara had heard before, low, powerful, and filled with ancient longing. The sound vibrated through the cabin walls, making the windows tremble. The 5 tiny dragons froze in their play, heads tilting toward the sound. Their eyes widened, and for the first time, a note of recognition flickered in their luminous gazes. Alara's heart stuttered. She knew what that call meant. She stepped outside, the bobbies clinging to her shoulders and arms. The sun was setting behind the highest peak, bathing the world in molten copper. There, silhouetted against the fiery sky, perched a majestic adult dragon. Its scales shimmered in deep forest green shot through with veins of gold and sapphire. Wings vast enough to shadow the entire clearing folded gracefully against its back. Eyes like molten amber regarded Alara with solemn intelligence. The adult dragon lowered its massive head, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of its young. A soft, rumbling purr, like distant thunder wrapped in velvet, rolled from its throat. The 5 bobbies chirped excitedly, fluttering their wings but remaining close to Alara, as if torn between instinct and the bond they had forged. Alara felt tears sting her eyes. She stepped forward slowly, arms open, the tiny dragons still clinging to her. "They are yours," she said, her voice steady despite the ache blooming in her chest. "But they have been mine too. I kept them warm, I fed them, I loved them when they had no one else." The great dragon regarded her for a long moment. Then, with deliberate grace, it lowered its head until its massive snout was level with Alara's face. A warm breath washed over her, scented with pine smoke and ancient magic. In that breath, she felt gratitude, deep and profound. One by one, the tiny dragons hesitated, then fluttered toward their parent. Ember went first, then Spark, Flicker, Blaze, and finally Cinder. They nuzzled against the adult's scales, chirping happily, but each cast a lingering glance back at Alara. The adult dragon reached forward with one massive claw. In its palm rested a small hoard of glittering treasures, flawless gemstones the size of walnuts, veins of pure gold, and a single iridescent scale that shimmered with all the colors the bobbies had worn. It placed the offering gently at Alara's feet. Then it spoke not in words but directly into her mind, a voice like rolling mountains and ancient forests. You have given my children what I could not in their hour of need: safety, warmth, love. The debt can never be fully repaid, but know this, human, the mountain will always watch over you, and my young will never forget the one who first taught them joy. Alara's tears fell freely now. She knelt and touched the adult dragon's claw with trembling fingers. Thank you for trusting me with them. They healed my lonely heart. The bobbies returned to her one last time, pressing warm bodies against her, nuzzling her cheeks and hands with fierce affection. Their chirps were soft, almost sorrowful. Alara hugged each one tightly, memorizing the feel of their scales, the sound of their heartbeats, the unique scent of each tiny flame. Go with your parent, she whispered. Grow strong, be kind, and remember you will always have a home here. With final chirps of farewell, the 5 tiny dragons climbed onto their parents' back. The great dragon spread its wings, casting a shadow that briefly engulfed the clearing. Then, with a powerful leap, it launched into the twilight sky. The bobbies looked back, their luminous eyes glowing like distant stars, until the family disappeared beyond the highest peaks. Alara stood alone in the clearing for a long time, the evening wind drying her tears. The cabin behind her was still marked by their presence: claw scratches on the shelves, singe marks on the beams, wax patterns on her recipe book, and the permanent lavender and smoke perfume that would never fully fade. She smiled through her tears. Her lonely life had ended the moment she brought those eggs home. And though the bobbies were gone, the love they had kindled remained, bright and unbreakable. In the weeks that followed, the cabin was never truly quiet again. Occasionally at dusk, a familiar chorus of high-pitched chirps would drift down from the mountains. 5 small shapes, larger now but still unmistakably hers, would circle above the clearing, performing playful aerial dances before vanishing into the clouds. Sometimes one would descend alone, landing on her windowsill with a soft thump. A warm snout would press against the glass, leaving a misty imprint, and Alara would open the window to offer a handful of honeyed fruits or simply to stroke the growing scales with gentle fingers. And every time, no matter how much mess they had once made, no matter how many treasures they left or how many new scratches appeared on her furniture, Alara could not find it in her heart to be mad. Because some messes are not destruction. They are the beautiful, chaotic proof that love has taken root, grown wings, and learned to fly. And Alara's heart, once so quiet and still, now soared with them, forever changed, forever full beneath the watchful gaze of the whispering peaks.